and welcome to Tech Talk, where you'll hear the latest in technology and investment trends directly from the trendsetters. I'm your host, Fritz Spencer, member of EisnerAmper's Technology and Life Sciences practice, and with me today is serial space entrepreneur Andrew Rush, co-founder and CEO of Starcatcher, where they're building the first energy grid in space. Before we dive in, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to EisnerAmper wherever you listen to your podcasts. And you can also find us on YouTube at EisnerAmper. In this episode, we'll explore space infrastructure, space entrepreneurship, and so much more. Andrew, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm super excited.
Thanks for having me, Fritz.
I would love to start us off by giving us a little bit of your background. I know from previous conversations that you started out as a lawyer and now you're building things in space. How does that happen? Give us a brief synopsis.
Yeah, that's right. So I'm a recovering lawyer. It takes a lifetime to recover. I actually started off as a patent lawyer, and my clients were space companies, 3D printing companies, some SaaS companies, and the like. And my largest clients were in the space sector, and actually the first company that I had the pleasure of leading was a company called Made in Space, which, as the name kind of says on the tin, was a company focused on manufacturing in space. Had a lot of world's first there. We did the first 3D printing in space. We made the first space-enabled optical fibers. We did some metal processing, as well as developed technologies to help satellites manufacture and assemble themselves in space. And I was asked by the leadership early on in the company's life cycle, by the founders, to come on board, first as president and then ultimately as CEO, to grow the company. Grew it from about 12 folks to about 140 folks. And then we sold that company to, at the time, a private equity-backed roll-up called Redwire. Is still backed by, in fact, Aero Equity Industrial Partners, which is down in South Florida, and was focused on building a middle market space subcomponents company to really kind of fit into the middle of the market and between a lot of the small folks that exist, as well as the giant kind of diversified aerospace and defense primes.
At EisnerAmper, we are creative problem solvers that take a 360-degree approach focusing on you. We're an award-winning firm with decades of experience. EisnerAmper. Let's get you ready.
Thank you so much for that background. Now let's hop into Starcatcher. In one sentence, can you explain your startup's mission to our audience?
Our mission at Starcatcher is to build an orbital energy grid in space to give satellites more power, higher concentrations of power, power and eclipse, ultimately to make it as easy to operate in space as it is to operate on the ground.
Beautiful. Well done. And let's go ahead and jump right into the problem that you kind of surfaced there. What was the specific challenge that you guys are aiming to solve with Starcatcher?
Every satellite in space is constrained by SWaP, or size, weight, and power constraints. Over the last 5 or 10 years, through the advent of reusable and lower cost rockets, we've seen the aperture really open up on the size and weight part of that equation. But every mission I've ever been involved with, we are fighting a power budget. You know, we're saying, hey, we need to turn these computers off so we can turn this radio on. Maybe we need to turn a 3D printer off in the middle of it printing something, which is like a crazy concept to think about if you've ever done any 3D printing, in order to stay power positive. And that's a huge bottleneck. I think it's actually the biggest bottleneck for space commercialization, industrialization, after low cost access to space, after, which has largely been addressed by Rocket Lab and SpaceX and now Blue Origin and others. And so we at Starcatcher are developing a constellation of satellites to beam energy to client satellites and send energy in wavelengths to those satellites that are compatible with their already existing solar arrays. So we use the technology they use to receive power from the sun. We just give them more and more consistent energy in that fashion. And we take advantage of the fact that solar arrays can, in fact, generate more power if you send higher intensities of light energy to them.
Great. Thanks for describing that problem for us. And let's go ahead and dive into it. It seems like it's a lot of technology you guys are dealing with, both in getting your technology up there and the technology that's on board these spacecrafts. So can you tell us a little bit more about how you're building it and that process that goes into designing something meant for space?
So at every company that I've had the pleasure of running or being part of the leadership team on, we always take kind of a crawl, walk, run approach to new technology development, to really buy down the technical risk and increase the business case. We're not big fans of saying, hey, I just need like $3 billion and I need to put 500 satellites up before you're going to see the value of what we do. There are people that float those business models. Very select few of them are able to get people to give them that kind of money, but that's just not how I like to operate. And so the way that we do this is we collect large amounts of energy from the sun using lens arrays, and then we condition that energy into specific wavelengths in the visible and the near infrared that interface really well with a client satellite's existing solar array. And then, of course, we beam that energy over great distances using diffraction-limited optics. That's really just a fancy way of saying we collimate the light as much as we can and we send it on. We get as tight a beam as possible, as tight a kind of flashlight beam as possible, and send that on to the client. Our roadmap for developing this is we first have been doing ground demonstrations showing, hey, we can collect the energy, we can beam it the way we say we're going to do it. We can track client satellites in the way we say we can do it. We can maintain the lock on those satellites in the way we do it. And then from there, we're doing more and more complex, higher energy, longer distance ground demonstrations before they're going to space, and starting with small satellites, graduating to larger satellites, and then eventually to a full up constellation. But we're building this out, we're architecting this in a way that we can make money along the way. We can start providing service with only 1 or 2 satellites up, and then we can use the money from those to fund or finance the future build out of the ultimate constellation. We're trying to be as intelligent and responsible with our investors' money, and also proving the technology to our customers so that as this comes online, they're aware of it and they're ready to use it once the system is deployed.
Well, I'm so glad you brought up both your investors and your customers, because I'd love to dive into both of those aspects. Let's start with your customers. Whose problem are you solving? Like, who wants access to this type of, I guess you might call it technology as a service? Who's in the game?
Yeah. So essentially every commercial and government satellite owner operator is a potential customer of this technology. There's not a single satellite mission that I've ever encountered that the power budget wasn't a consideration. Folks really would love to have, one more set of pictures they can take per orbit. And for a telecommunications satellite, literally every watt that comes into the spacecraft is an incremental amount of data that they can transmit, that they can handle. We're also seeing the advent of orbital data centers, taking all the great data storage and processing we have on the ground and putting that in space to help support remote sensing, to help make telecommunications satellites better. And as we all know, data centers, especially AI-oriented data centers, are huge power hogs. So we have all these customers. LEO telecommunications constellation want to do satellite to device, orbital data centers, and remote sensing, Earth observation customers. All of these guys need as much power as you possibly can give them. And so those are the folks that we are marketing to and are really resonating to. We actually have 34 or 35 letters of intent signed with customers across all of those verticals, including customers that are now giving us deposits to lock in a power rate for a period of years because they see the value of this.
So you've told me a little bit about your customer. Now let's move on to the investor side. Are you raising? Have you raised? I know you've been through this process A to Z before with startup to IPO. So tell me about where you're at and where you're looking to be.
A little less than a year ago, we announced Starcatcher and our Series Seed raise. Some really great partners there. We raised $12.25 million. It was co-led by Initialized Capital out in the San Francisco Bay Area and B Capital based in New York City. B Capital's chairman is Howard Morgan, who's just a really amazing, venerated investor, founder of First Round Capital, Rentech, and the co-CEO of B Capital is also Eduardo Saveron from Facebook. On the Initialized Capital side, we're a really great partner, Andrew Sather, that we work very closely with there. Initialized was actually founded by Gary Tan, who also founded Y Combinator. Since that time, we've made a lot of really exceptional technical and business progress, and intend to raise a Series A, toward the end of the year.
Wow. Congratulations on all those different milestones you're meeting. So that Series A, what's the next milestone for you guys? What's your next big push?
We really tried to be very intentional in our Series Seed raise and laid out 3 or 4 main objectives for what we were going to do with the capital we raised. Hire a great team, secure at least 24 commercial expressions of interest and support in the technology, secure a couple $1 million in customers, and then also really demonstrate that we own the technology stack through ground demonstration. We said those would take 2 years. Here we are, a year in. We have 30 folks on the team from Lockheed Martin, L3 Harris, Rocket Lab, Redwire, Made in Space, Boom, just really, really amazing, talented engineers. Like I mentioned, we have 34, 35 letters of intent. So we, exceeded that goal. We have a couple $1 million in contracts with customers, doing some great work for them there. And we've done a series of ground demonstrations, and we're really capping off the ground demonstrations later in Q4. We're going to go down to Cape Canaveral, and there's a really long runway there. It's about 4 kilometers long. The space shuttle used to land on. We're going to beam power from one end of that runway to the other, to both static and mobile kind of mock satellites that are moving around or static, show that we can beam and deliver significant amounts of power over a really great distance. And then once we accomplish that, that's really the last sort of cherry on top for what we've done in this epoch of the company, and then we'll go raise the Series A.
You mentioned a lot about some of the people you have around you, and a lot of them internal, a lot of them external. Here at EisnerAmper, we're accountants and advisors, and we feel like we serve our clients in the same way that those advisors are probably serving you. Can you tell me a little bit more about how advisors play a role in the success of your companies?
Yeah, space is a team sport. You can't build something great by yourself. Like, you can build something quickly. If you want to go far, you got to go with a team of folks. And, so we've been fortunate to, over the years, from the last couple of companies we've grown, to have a lot of folks, both external and internal, that have supported us. And many of them are helping here. Like, a big part of being a space company is actually maintaining relationships, in DC, whether that's on Capitol Hill or at the Pentagon or at NASA. And so we have folks, external partners, that are helping us there, that worked with us in the past. We actually just recently brought on recently retired colonel from the Space Force, named Colonel Eric Felt. For 4 years, ran like one of the largest space prototyping divisions in the Space Force. And so Eric's really, really insightful, and both helps make connections with customers for us, as well as say, hey, if you zig instead of zag here, that will make your service even more compelling to this really broad customer base there.
Based on what you've described so far, and something we hear so much more and more now is dual use. And this screams dual use for me, both from who you're hiring, who you're building it for, and military sector especially. I'd love to, if in some closing remarks, you could leave us with something that has either been pivotal for you and the team, or something that has stuck with you throughout your entire entrepreneurial journey.
2 things come to mind. One is, there's no substitute for persistence. I personally have been very fortunate in my career in, meeting people in ways that have felt very serendipitous, and then having people kind of give me a chance. But for every like serendipitous meeting that I've ever had, there's like 20 or 30 meetings that nothing comes of, right? Or that nothing comes of right in that moment. The next meeting or the meeting after that, or somebody remembers you a year or 2 later and says, hey, what about this? So really, that just persistence and like pressing on forward has been core to my entrepreneurial journey. Folks that kind of internalize, that's really helped me, and I think it's helps other people. The other thought I'll leave you with here is startups are a roller coaster, right? Like, you have to be able to maintain the vision and maintain your head when like you get slapped around in the morning because something went off the rails, and then in the afternoon you get some great news, and then that evening you stub your toe on something, and and then you just rinse and repeat that cycle and keep the trend lines going up, but they're squiggly as they go along.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Andrew, for taking the time to have this conversation with me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Certainly, Fritz. Thanks for having me.
Of course. And for those who'd like to follow along Starcatcher's journey, what's the best way to connect with you and the company?
Yeah, so our website is star-catcher.com. If you can acquire the starcatcher.com for a reasonable price, I'd be grateful. We're also on all of your social media channels, with the exception of TikTok, at StarCatcherInd. That's Starcatcher IND.
And a special thanks to our listeners today for tuning into Tech Talk, the entrepreneurs and innovators who